from Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Careless talk costs lives. Loose lips sink ships. These were things said during the war to encourage the public not to talk openly in public about any military information they knew. Well, I've spent nearly 20 years in the European Parliament, and believe you me, if you want to find out what is going on in Brussels, just sit in the corner of any of the bars, because everybody in Brussels seems to go to the pub after work and they talk pretty openly about what they do. I've remonstrated with staff of mine and fellow MEPs over the years. Well, last night it was the turn of Ollie Robbins. Remember him? He's the chief civil servant, the bureaucrat in charge of negotiating the Brexit deal. You may have heard his name before. He was, when he was at Oxford University, in charge of an organisation campaigning for a federal Europe, believe it or believe it not. And of course, he seemed to be very much the architect behind the whole real sellout, as Eurosceptics would see it, over the Irish backstop and everything really that's happened since Chequers. Now, last night we talked about the Prime Minister, the fact she's asked for a further 2 weeks. Let's remind ourselves, the Prime Minister always tells us that we're going to leave on March the 29th. Here she is.
We will leave the European Union in March 2019.
We will leave the European Union and we will leave on the 29th of March 2019.
We are going to leave the European Union in March 2019.
We're leaving the European Union on the 29th of March.
We are going to leave on the 29th of March 2019.
We're leaving the European Union on the 29th of March 2019.
We will be leaving the EU on the 29th of March 2019 at 11 p.m.
OK, you've got that, everybody. We're leaving at 11 p.m. on March the 29th. Or are we? Because, you see, her chief negotiator, the man who has spent countless hours negotiating with Monsieur Barnier and everybody else, and who, I have to say, in my opinion, is not acting in the interests of our country, is not acting at all in the interests of 17.4 million people. I thought from the start he's actually working more for Monsieur Barnier. Now, he takes a very, very different view. So what happened last night? He'd been at a big event, Ollie Robbins, in Brussels, went to the pub afterwards, and blow me down if sitting in that pub was not an ITV journalist called Angus Walker. All of this happened about a couple of hours after we came off air last night, and late last night Angus Walker spoke on LBC and told us what he'd overheard.
We went into the bar, and my cameraman and I, and there was Ollie Robbins and two of his colleagues sitting there. I think if he'd realised I was a journalist, he probably wouldn't have, he may have stopped talking, but right. I don't think he recognised me at all. The really fundamental point I think that he was making was that he was telling his colleagues that in his view that the strategy would be to offer MPs a deal in March, a choice in March between a deal and a delay, and during the conversation suggestions of that delay being quite lengthy.
Well, he's said to have said, got to make them believe that the week beginning the end of March, extension is possible if they don't vote for the deal. And that extension is a long one. Wow. He also said, Ollie Robbins, the big clash all along is the safety net, by which he means the backstop. We agreed a bridge, but it came out as a safety net. But hey, those remarks suggest that both the Prime Minister and Ollie Robbins from the start saw some form of relationship of customs union as being where they wanted the finishing position to be. I have to say, I think he's absolutely banged to rights. I think the cat's out of the bag. There's no question in my mind. Mrs May, of course, had to face this at Prime Minister's Question Time today, though not from Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn didn't mention it. Why? Well, of course, because the Labour Party themselves are very, very split. Remember Yvette Cooper's amendment, which was to make sure that if there is no deal, that there be an extension of at least 9 months or perhaps a year. So Corbyn said nothing on this issue, but Henry Smith MP did pose a question. This is what Mrs May had to say.
I'm grateful that he has asked me that question rather than relying on what someone said to someone else as overheard by someone else in a bar. It's very clear the government's position is the same. We triggered Article 50. In fact, this House voted to trigger Article 50. That had a 2-year timeline. That ends on the 29th of March. We want to leave with the deal, and that's what we're working for.
We want to leave with the deal, she's now saying. She's not saying, earlier on, I put all those clips, we are leaving. She's now saying, we want to leave with the deal. And I think that distinction is important. Look, I have no doubt in my mind that Ollie Robbins was telling the truth in that bar in Brussels last night, and that Angus Walker from ITV was sharp-eared and picked it all up. Let me ask you, if next month, as I fully anticipate, Mrs May, who's run the clock down, presents the House of Commons with an ultimatum. It's my deal, or it's a long extension to Article 50. How would you react? Maybe you'd say to me, well, actually, it means we just have to accept her deal, however bad it is, in which case let me know on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think this actually would mean you would wipe your hands of the Tories forever, and it could even split the party, in which case text to 84850. And I want to hear particularly, if you're a Remainer, is this good news? Is an extension, and perhaps even a long extension to Article 50, is that what you've really wanted all along? Please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC, at LBC, and of course, Facebookers, you can comment there too. I have to say, I really begin to think more and more, and I've been saying it for weeks or perhaps even months, but I begin to think more and more that the prospect of this can being kicked down the road is becoming perhaps even the favourite option. That's my view. It's not what I want, but it is my view. Jan and Paul say, evening Nigel, we've already wiped our hands of the Tory party. We'll be incandescent with rage if she tries to push this vote through. Well, she is going to try to push this vote through, and it's pretty clear to me that the backstop is still going to be there, but she'll say, vote for this, or we're going to have a long extension to Article 50. And she'll try and face down, particularly the Eurosceptics in her own party and in the ERG. Martin is calling from Forest Hill. Good evening, Martin.
Good evening. I think both options are terrible because an extension will just lead to further compromises. But if we had to accept May's awful deal, wouldn't it be simple just to put a proviso on it that not a penny of the 39 billion is paid until there is a solution to the backstop? That would call out the EU on any hidden agenda they might have if they resist it.
But that doesn't work, Martin, because this is the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May's put into the House of Commons, and in the withdrawal agreement is the commitment already to 39 billion. And she's not going to get that agreed by Brussels, is she?
Yeah, but can still pay it, but not until not until the backstop ends. So they still get their money, provided they play ball.
But I understand the argument, Martin, but it won't work, because with Brussels, she has to say to them, doesn't she, in a reasonable period before March the 29th, because, hey, Brussels, this European Parliament, has to ratify it as well. It's either the withdrawal. I mean, there are three choices here, Martin, aren't there? One is the withdrawal agreement with whatever amendment she can get on the backstop. A codicil is probably what we're talking about here. The second option is we leave with no deal on WTO terms, and I've been pushing very hard for Article 24, but I can tell you...
That would be my favourite as well.
Well, it would be, but I can tell you
I don't think
one of my members of staff today met with Foreign Office representatives, and then they're not even considering that option. I mean, let's be clear. And the third option is we have an extension. So, Martin, if this is the choice that Mrs May puts to the House of Commons and she ignores the third option of leaving with no deal, could she perhaps even split the Conservative Party?
I think she will, and she'll split the country.
Martin, I don't disagree with you.
Blackmailing us into her dreadful deal.
That is exactly, Martin, what she's doing. You've got it. You have got it. Paul from Norwich is the new caller to the show. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Nigel. Thank you very much. I just think that they're trying to, as your last speaker was saying, they're trying to rail us into voting for this, or the MPs for voting for Theresa May's deal.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's all about. We don't want it. That isn't Brexit. But her plan is to push. She also knows the default position is to leave without a deal, but I just cannot see it happening because I don't know. There's too many MPs that are against it. So, yeah, I just don't. I don't know what to say. It's all a bit of a mess. But her deal is atrocious, and I don't see the EU changing the deal on the backstop either. So we shall see.
No, they're talking about adding something called a codicil. It's a nice form of words that will say we never intend to use it. But frankly, it isn't good enough, Paul. Paul, I mean, what do you? I mean, do you ever get the feeling that maybe the Prime Minister hasn't completely played straight with us from the very beginning of this?
Nigel, she's lied all the way through.
Oh, Paul, they're strong words.
Yeah. Well, it's true. We've been told multiple times. This whole deal with Chequers coming out the way it did. And David Davis being essentially sidelined by Sir Ollie Robbins was doing the negotiating in the background. That just tells exactly what she is up to. And I'm afraid it's all about not delivering Brexit.
I'm afraid...
on a quick note, we have already been offered a Canada plus deal, and that was rejected. So
7th of March last year.
Why wasn't that accepted?
7th of March last year, Donald Tusk offered that. The Prime Minister didn't want it. Hey, Paul, thank you. Paul says to me, Robbins has dumped Raab and Davis, both Brexiteers. That alone tells you Robbins doesn't represent the UK. It's clear. May has been rumbled. A disgrace. Leslie is downcast. She says she hoped it would not be the case, but I now think we've been stitched up and lied to, and we won't be leaving on March the 29th. Very keen to hear from Remainers. Are you pleased? Is the Prime Minister effectively doing your work for you? Are we in a very strange world where the predominantly Remain Labour Party is led by a Leaver and the predominantly Leave Conservative Party is led by a Remainer? Tough to work it all out sometimes, isn't it? You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:15 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. I mean, how is it that a Prime Minister who says we're leaving the European Union on March the 29th, who called a snap general election, saying Brexit means Brexit, how is it she appoints somebody as chief negotiator who, and OK, you can argue it was when he was back at university, but headed up a group campaigning for a federal Europe. But when he goes into a bar in Brussels last night, he basically says, look, we were always trying to build a bridge between us and the European Union, hinting that some sort of customs arrangement had been the plan from the very beginning, and quite openly says, well, we're going to basically blackmail MPs and say, look, you vote for this deal with the backstop, or it's a long extension to Article 50. Somebody's not being straight here. Peter says to me, I can't believe that this civil servant is so incompetent. Surely it comes under official secrets. Letting the EU know our every move is inept. No, Peter, you're completely and utterly wrong on both counts. This civil servant is not incompetent. He's highly competent. He's not being inept in letting them know our every move. He's working for them. He's working for the other side. He wants to keep us in. I mean, frankly, it's pretty treacherous behaviour, and I know that is a very strong words. So let's just remind ourselves of what Mrs May has been saying over and over and over again.
We're leaving the European Union on the 29th of March 2019.
OK, and let's listen to Theresa May in the House of Commons at Prime Minister's Questions today.
The government's position is the same. We triggered Article 50. In fact, this House voted to trigger Article 50. That had a 2-year timeline. That ends on the 29th of March. We want to leave with a deal, and that's what we're working for.
So we've gone from an absolutely definite assertive we are, it's now we want. I think Ollie Robbins told the truth in that bar last night. This is what they're planning. And if there's no change to the backstop, are the Jacob Rees-Moggs and others going to vote for something that keeps us effectively trapped in something from which there's no way out? I mean, you could argue that at least with EU membership, we have Article 50. There's no such thing with this backstop. So how do you react to it? Do you react with fury? Do you react with flying a white flag and saying, OK, we've got to go for Mrs May's deal? And I'm particularly keen to hear from Remainers and what they think about this set of circumstances. Chris is calling from Bristol. Good evening, Chris.
Hi there, Mr Farage.
Hi there. So, how do you react to this? I mean, Mrs May lining up to try and blackmail the Commons into voting for a terrible deal or a long extension.
Well, I feel that any deal that prevents the freedom of movement is a good deal. because I am very worried. Very, very worried. I am a council tenant. Now, when I signed my tenancy agreement, it was a tenancy agreement for life, providing I stuck to the terms and conditions of the tenancy agreement, of course. Mm-hmm. But I got a horrible feeling, because I don't know about where else in the country, but here in Bristol, the social housing crisis, there's a real big social housing crisis. There are people sleeping on the streets. There are people sleeping in tents in parks. There are people sleeping in sleeping bags in subways. The council just can't cope. They have got so many people on the waiting list waiting to get homes, and many more waiting to get on the waiting list. I've got a horrible feeling that the councils are going to have to say, not because they want to, they're going to have to say, we will give you this council tenancy agreement, but it will be limited to an X number of years. You can leave before that time is up, subject to a notification period.
I've got no doubt, Chris, you're right, that massive population increase, most of it through open door immigration, has put massive pressure on these things. But Chris, I'm going to disappoint you here by telling you there is nothing in the withdrawal agreement about ending freedom of movement. Nothing. All right? Despite what she says, what there is in the political declaration, which is the aspiration for the future, a note that the European Union accepts that we voted to end the freedom of movement and that we will discuss ways to do this. But this withdrawal agreement, Chris, this deal that she's trying to force through the House of Commons, does not tackle that problem in any way at all.
Right. So if we get this withdrawal agreement, we could still end up freedom of movement.
If we get this agreement, there'll be let's say she gets this through. We'll finish up with a 2 or 3 year period of transition, during which we will negotiate. She promises us in that period she will end freedom of movement. But I would just argue, Chris, she's promised us a few things in the past and not delivered. Would you trust her to do that in the next 2 or 3 years?
No, I won't trust.
No,
because
well, I think
I'm scared that what they will start off by doing, maybe, I don't know if they will do it countrywide, but in Bristol, I think they probably will, for the simple reason there is a massive demand on social housing, and they will say to new tenants, not just council, but housing tenants associations too, because everybody's on the same waiting list here in Bristol, whether everybody goes on the same waiting list, and they might get council tenant, they might get housing association tenancy, and what they will do is they say, right, okay, your tenancy is for X number of years. That should find you plenty of time to find a private accommodation landlord.
I sympathise with your argument, and I think there'll be out there in this country many millions of people who've noticed what these pressures are. Chris, I thank you. Matt says to me by text, evening Nigel, Remainer alert. We need to extend Article 50 until the only credible choices are leave or remain. I thought we'd done that before, Matt, as it should have been from the off. Not something in between, which is something nobody who has a modicum of sanity wants or thought we're going to end up with. Well, Matt, I do sympathise with that, actually, because, this is a Remain as Brexit. That is what Mrs May is trying to foist upon the House of Commons and upon the country. The whole thing is a disgrace. Brian says, Nigel, I am baffled why, if all these superior politicians and businesses see it as right to hijack the vote of the people, why do they ask us to vote at all? The day democracy died. Well, Brian, there is talk that if Article 50 is extended, and Ollie Robbins is talking about a long extension, that maybe to try and avoid European elections on May the 23rd, they'll just appoint MEPs, and that really would be the day democracy died. I mean, why not just cancel all elections and put all the Oxbridge candidates in charge of the country for the next 50 years? Matt is calling from Dartford. Hi, Matt.
Hiya. I just wanted to say, if we're going to have a bit of a reality check, the guy who is in charge of the Brexit negotiations and the civil service, a very important role, whether we like it or not, is not going to just let slip in a bar something so important without either being told to do so or told to somehow get the feeling out there so that people like you on radio are debating it and MPs are going to give their opinions and the government will get a feel for how people feel about it way long before we're supposed to leave. Because if you drop it in 10 days before the 29th of March, you've got no way of dealing with any awkward questions.
Do you know, Matt, I understand what you're saying. However, I'll tell you something. People who work, and he has been working, I mean, I disagree wholly with what Robbins has done, right? But he has been working under extreme pressure for many, many months. And people who work under extreme pressure, when they go out after a long day to bars, I mean, I'm not saying this is true in his case, but I know from my own experience, you know, once you go out after a long day, you do tend to down a couple and cut loose and perhaps throw caution to the wind.
Yeah, perhaps. And then on the option of whether it was Theresa May's deal or an extension, I voted leave, and I wouldn't be happy, but I would accept an extension of 2 years even to prolong it, as long as it doesn't mean taking the withdrawal agreement, especially with the backstop as it is now, because if we take that, we may as well just lock ourselves in for eternity. So even if I had to wait 5 years, but it meant we left, and we left properly.
Okay. So leaving properly, buying time to maybe get a new Conservative leader.
Yes.
Would that make sense?
Yeah, I think Theresa May has exhausted all of her avenues. She's not getting anywhere. Her cabinet are to remain, her party are to remain, and I think actually, with new parties on the scene at the moment, as you well know, it could end up splitting the vote slightly, and therefore I think actually it could re-energise the Conservative Party on the Eurosceptic wing, and perhaps they could have another election, because she says she wouldn't stand in another election.
Well, it's interesting, Matt. But I tell you what, I'm all the time we hear stories about new parties being formed on the left and the centre and the right, and parties may be splitting, and generally they don't. Matt, I do believe this issue could genuinely split the Tory party. Thank you for your thoughts and your call. Fiorella says, Mrs May can promise what she likes for the transition period because she knows she won't be Prime Minister when we get to the end of it. I think that's probably right. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 6:30 and time for the news. With Lisa Aziz. Well, Ollie Robbins in a bar in Brussels late last night says they're going to push MPs to the wire and then basically point a political gun at them and say, right, vote for this deal, or there could be a lengthy extension to Article 50. I think he's telling the truth. And I notice that the Prime Minister is far less certain today. She's not saying we will leave the European Union. On March 29th, she's saying we want to leave the European Union. Now, tomorrow is Valentine's Day, of course, and it was supposed to be the big parliamentary day, but Theresa May has bought more time. There is going to be a debate tomorrow on the European Union, and the text of the government motion is that this House welcomes the Prime Minister's statement of the 12th of February, reiterates its support for the approach to leaving the EU expressed by this House on the 29th of January, and notes that discussions between the UK and the EU on the Northern Irish backstop are ongoing. Now, that may, on the face of it, look pretty bland, but it does, and this is a government motion, say that it reiterates the support for the approach to leaving expressed by the House. That, of course, includes the Spellman and Dromey Amendment, the one that passed the other day, which would prevent a no-deal Brexit. So, as you can imagine, the Eurosceptics are going bonkers about this, because it would appear that whilst publicly she continues to say, Mrs May, that no deal is an option, in reality, in writing, the government's motion says no deal is simply not going to happen. I, folks, for the life of me, do not know why. It seems to me that WTO and invoking Article 24 of the GATT Treaty is the sensible way forward. But hey, who am I? So, if Mrs May does this to the House of Commons, if she presents them with this choice, how would you react to it? I'm going to Munich to speak to James. Good evening, James.
Good evening, Nigel. Good to speak to you again.
Good to speak to you. Welcome back. So, what do you think the reaction is going to be to Mrs May? I mean, could she even split her own party if she behaves like this?
Yes. There is no way that in a situation where we end up delaying Article 50, which inevitably will result in a second referendum, because that's realistically the only reason the EU would actually allow an extension in any case. They are then going to fight against each other from the ERG side and also the Subaru side in a far more vicious way than they ever did a couple of years ago, because, of course, this time it will be it. There will be no more sort of belief of if you vote out once, then there'll be the best of three. This will be the end of the line for the Subaru camp, and that will then sort of create division between her party the likes of which they have never seen before and never had to fight. It will also. The other issue is it means that we are voting again on on Brexit, but it won't be a matter of Brexit as a sort of a concept of mean whatever the political establishment would like it to mean. It will mean either Remain or a WTO proper Brexit, because, quite frankly, I come at this as a sort of reluctant Remainer. Well, that's how I voted in 2016. But on the day of the day after the referendum, I sort of thought, this might not be what I wanted, but I saw tremendous opportunity in opening Britain up, avoiding EU over-regulation, tremendous amounts of protectionism that the Common
none of that's being done, James, is it?
And that's not the withdrawal agreement. And Jacob Rees-Mogg is right in the sense of the withdrawal agreement isn't Brexit. I know people, sort of frustrated Remainers, hardcore Remainers, will sort of claim that there was no definition of what Remain was, but what Leave meant. But David Cameron defined what Leave meant at £9 million. Every single one of them mentioned leaving the single market. There was also, the only way you can commit to ending with the free movement of people is being out of both the single market and the customs union. Keeping our fish, Macron has already said he's going to sort of blackmail the UK through the backstop into keeping us in the common fisheries policy. That's simply not Brexit, and that is something. That's a sort of a removal of rights from the British electorate that they simply must be able to vote on before that can happen.
So do you think, James, given, and you've analysed her deal, her withdrawal agreement, and I agree with a lot of what you've said, although I could add several other points that are pretty awful too. Do you think in these circumstances, ironically, maybe extension's the best thing?
Yes. I personally, I come at this for the economics from a similar point to you. I was born in Lincolnshire, and I'm a classical free market Thatcherite. So Brexit, to me, has to mean abandoning EU rules. And if this deal gets through, then not only will we be stuck with EU rules, but unlike with membership, where we have Article 50, we can't even get away from them.
No, I know.
So unless we have an extension and we end up with a WTO Brexit, we won't have any Brexit at all, which will mean we won't get the advantages of leaving, but we also won't have the advantages of Remain either.
No. Well, it's very interesting, Joe, because actually demand for a second referendum has plunged, and yet, with an extension, we will start to hear those arguments again. James, I thank you. Trevor says he wants a long extension to Article 50. So does Ollie Robbins, Trevor. I reckon Robbins would like about 10 years, probably. Why have a bad deal when the best deal we've got is the one we have at the moment? Stop Brexit. Let's call the whole thing off. Trevor, that isn't going to happen. There is a majority of people that want Brexit to happen. Nigel, Mrs May and her government, Graham says, both survived votes of no confidence. She's also declared she will not stand again. Under these circumstances, she can do whatever she wants. Well, I guess she can. And of course, because she survived that motion of confidence, she's safe for the best part of another year. I've got a caller from Mrs May's own constituency of Maidenhead. Adela is the name. Good evening.
Hi, good evening, Nigel.
Welcome to LBC. So she's your MP. She's your MP. Would it be reasonable of her to take this down to the wire and then say it's my deal or a long extension?
Well, I don't think that's a fair representation, Nigel, to be honest with you, because I do believe that in the last 2 years she has tried her best. I do think that what she's got, the raw deal that she's got to negotiate Brexit, is not what any of her predecessors had to do. So, I think she's doing the best she can, and I think we need to sort of stick together in our country, including Brexiteers and Remainers, and say, look, let's see what we get, and what we're getting is not great, so fine, we won't take it. We won't take it, but we can't be calling them treacherous and, all the things that has been called in the media.
I think, I'm sorry, but I think Ollie Robbins is working for the other side. I think he's trying to stop Brexit. I genuinely do. Adela, you make the point that she's tried her best. And there are many, many millions of people in the country who think she is trying her best and she deserves some support. And there is a degree of sympathy for the Prime Minister, which is a very unusual thing to feel about the leader of a country. But the question is, Adela, what has she been trying her best to do? Has she been trying her best to get us a clean break from the European Union? No. She's been trying her best to forge a new, close and special relationship. And so I would argue, Adela, that she's been trying her best to do the wrong thing.
Well, you have a point there. I do agree that what she's been doing maybe not in the best interest of Remainers or the Leavers. Yes, that's correct. But that's not because that's something that she's chosen to do. It's something that the other side has given us. EU are not going to give us a good deal. We all know that. But what we can't do is that, say, in a month and a half's time, we will leave on WTO terms, because I think that's not just going to cost money, that's going to cost lives in the end. That's very irresponsible as well.
Well, I don't think it is. I don't think it is. But hey, we've got different opinions on this. But so your message is that people should rally round the Prime Minister's deal, yeah?
Well, no, my message here today is I think right now we need more time. We can have a WTO Brexit in the end, but we don't have to agree to this deal today, but we shouldn't say just leave no matter what. What we need to do is give it more time, because in the end, the way I see her deal, I mean, this is not being sympathetic to her at all when I say this, because what I see in her deal is just handing over £39 billion just to be able to talk to EU in the end, because this deal doesn't give us anything in the end. So why would we do that? Just don't get the deal and, go on, have some more time, prepare for a no-deal Brexit, so people aren't falling off the, cliffs of Dover in the end. And,
all right.
we are ready for
Adela,
Brexit in the end.
There is logic to what you say, but I would counter you by saying she's had 2 years already. But hey, Adela, I thank you for your sincerity and your desire to get people together and get the right solution. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:46 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz. Well, if the Tories are in a mess over Brexit, what of the Labour Party? And as Politics Home's Kevin Schofield tweeted this morning, slap down for Starmer. Jeremy Corbyn's office insists a general election remains Labour's preferred option as a way out of the Brexit mess. Yet on radio this morning, Starmer had said the only credible options were a compromise deal or a second referendum. Clear? So you see, it's not just the Conservatives. The whole political system in Britain cannot cope with this. And there are some, of course, who desperately want us to remain part of this wonderful European Union. Maybe worth pointing out that the industrial production figures for the Eurozone came out today, showing a 0.9% drop in the month of December alone. Industrial production in the Eurozone has fallen by 4% over the course of last year. And Germany have managed to avoid going into official recession by just 0.1%. Statisticians saying because the quarter was 1 day longer than the previous period. So Italy officially in recession and Germany all but in recession. Mrs May is going to hold a political gun to the head of her own party. That is what Ollie Robbins said in a bar in Brussels last night. Was it that he was unwinding after a stressful few days, or is Colin right when he says to me that he thinks that Robbins knew who was in the bar and wanted to get across to the public what would happen if MPs didn't vote for her deal? A long delay. Who's to say who was right? Colin, my experience of this, I've seen it again and again and again. People who, when the day's over, let the shoulders down, let go, and say things they probably shouldn't. Chris in Lancaster is a new caller. Good evening, Chris.
Hi, Nigel. Hi, how are you?
Hi there. So, how do you think Mrs May's handling all of this? Is this a reasonable thing to present MPs with?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm really quite frustrated with the whole process, to be honest. I really am. I'm getting really quite annoyed with it, just watching the way that it's all panning out. But there's an awful lot of... Personally, I think there's an awful lot of smoke and mirrors going on. And I think that what could potentially happen is that there's been so much focus on this backstop in that it's so bad. It really is. But there's all the rest of the deal. The rest of Theresa May's deal is atrocious. And it would really, I think...
It's the worst deal in history, Chris. It's terrible.
It is, absolutely. Now, that's the thing. So now we're at this stage where, the backstop's atrocious, terrible. Okay, last minute they could turn around and say, okay, we'll do away with the backstop, but then what leg have we got to stand on? We take the rest of the deal, you know. And
well, I think to be honest, Chris, you know, Boris Johnson and people like him have made it clear if the backstop goes, they will support the deal. But I'm with you, Chris. I think the rest of the deal is
isn't it? You know, so and possibly that was designed from the start because it is really bad. Making us subservient to the EU. And I think that's the thing in the long run anyway. I mean, look at the way that Theresa May was saying to them, "Oh, Your Excellency," and all the rest of it. You know?
Oh, yeah. Monsieur Barnier, Your Excellency. It is. Yeah. No, Chris, I'm like you, Chris. I'm very angry with it. I'm going to move on. I'm going to Nairobi in Kenya to speak to Rosie, a new caller. Good evening, Rosie.
Good evening.
And welcome to LBC. Hello, hi. So, watching this from afar, would this be a reasonable choice for the Prime Minister to put to MPs?
No, and I think you shouldn't listen to her blackmail. If she just refused to vote for a deal and then see what comes up next, I don't think you can give in to blackmail.
Right, so you think the MPs should, on principle, vote against the deal on the basis that it's a bad deal?
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like I'm in Alice in Wonderland watching all this. I don't know if you can explain Mrs. May to me and why she's chosen Oily Robbins. Well, I know why she's chosen him, of course, but I can't understand her. I cannot.
Well, I thought, Rosie, that it was Theresa the appeaser all through the negotiations, but actually, I think she's worse than being an appeaser. I think she's the most duplicitous Prime Minister we've ever had in our lifetimes, Rosie. She consistently says one thing to please the crowds, and then does another. And we see examples of it, Rosie, again and again and again. And Brexit isn't the problem, but the Prime Minister is, Rosie. That's my view.
And mine. She's unbelievable. And I thought, being a vicar's daughter, she wouldn't be such a terrible liar. But I'm disappointed.
Well, I'm saying duplicitous, which is a really posh word for it. Rosie, thanks for your long distance call. I've got time for one more caller tonight. I'm going to go to Luton and speak to John, a new caller. Good evening, John.
Hello there. Yeah, great to talk to you, Nigel. I think Theresa May should be presenting Sale of the Century with her deal. That would be a good programme for her to be on.
Was that the one Nicholas Parsons presented didn't he, years ago?
You'll be like, here, you can take all our stuff, we're giving it away free of charge. But what I want, it's a blackmail deal. I actually vote against it. I was on to a LBC presenter the other day who was an obsessive Remainer, and I was trying to explain. Yeah, sorry?
I'm not joking, go on.
Saturday night, I won't say it, but he kept using silly quotes from you. But I said, look, come on, man. I'm a businessman. I work at a business. I sell in the pharmaceutical industry in Singapore, China, and we do great. It's got nothing to do with the EU. They stick with British people because they like British people. They've got a great reputation. I said, look, if Ireland wants to export their agricultural stuff to the EU, do you can imagine, is the Prime Minister going to let Irish people starve? And what about that lady in Holland who was saying that 20% of my onions, that's big business, go to the UK? Come on, we'll get out of the EU, no deal, and let's say, look, a sensible trade deal. That's what we need. And I'm so frustrated. But I think if we go for an extension, I would actually say she's going to be out. If we went for an extension, she'll be forced out, Nigel.
Yeah, well, but her own party can't force her out. She'd have to resign, wouldn't she? But if she saw the Tory party about to split into two, then maybe she'd go. I mean, there is one other option, John, possibly. If she realises just how serious this split is, maybe at the very last minute she'll say, well, I hate this. Ollie Robbins has never pushed me into this, but maybe a WTO Brexit is the only way I can save my skin, save my legacy and save the Conservative Party. That maybe, if the pressure on her is great enough, there could be, for us, John, and people like us who believe in global trade and not needing EU rules, there could for us be a happy ending after all. I doubt it, but I'm going to go to sleep tonight thinking in that positive note. John, thank you. Thank you, everybody. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'll be back tomorrow evening in London from 6. At 10 tonight, it's Ian Payne. But up next, it's Ian Dale.